One of the nasty behaviors I will do to a specific group of people is take the logic they insist on applying to one subject and deliberately apply it to something they don't want it applied to, because then they'd have to pick whether or not their logic has to work for one or the other, and it gets really uncomfortable for them. Now, the reason for this is actually based on scientists. I'm not kidding about that. Left-wingers and scientists, I lump them together, but they're not really the same thing, obviously. And atheists versus religious people, I do the same thing to them. We all like our world to work the way we want it to on the outcome, but if we use the same standard of fact, reality, and truth, we can't have a world we want. I'm going to be starting off talking about weapons demonization, and it's also going to be about 3D printed guns and the meme about it. But let's go on really quickly. A Glock 22 holds 22 rounds of 40 Smith & Wesson. You might think that it would be a 22 caliber, but it's actually based on naming it for its capacity. The Caltech PMR 30 holds 30 rounds, and it's a 22 caliber. And they're 22 Magnum. Now, the difference, if you're not aware of it, between a 22 Magnum and a 22 long rifle cartridge is what it's usually called, because they're similar, not the same size, is that on a 22 Magnum, the casing is actually physically wider than it is on the long rifle cartridge. And that also means that the cartridge itself on the 22 long rifle is the same or almost the same diameter as the bullet that comes out of it, the actual bullet. The reason for that is the bullet's shaped like this, and we'll just assume this is the part that's sticking in the casing, and this part is pinched in. It's called a heeled bullet. Why is that significant? The chamber for a 22 long rifle and a 22 Magnum are different, but the actual bullet going through is so similar you can get away with using the same barrel if they had the same chamber. It's really just so they can have a little more pep to them, a little more space for propellant. It also makes the bullet much more symmetrical. Anyway, let's continue. The 22 long rifle version we're going to talk about is the Caltech CP33. Now, its standard holds 33 rounds, but it has 50 round magazines. These are plinking guns. High capacity magazine versus packing more bullets in the same space by packing them in double rows, triple, or quadruple, quad stack, or coffin, or casket, or sarcophagus magazine format. And also, some of these can be made and are available with permanently installed magazines where you have to feed the bullets in one at a time. But at that point, you have a 50-round magazine that shoots. I mean, for crying out loud, these are really high capacity in some cases. And yes, there are guns with higher capacity. Quad stack, coffin, casket, sarcophagus magazines maximize capacity, but all X-ray as a gun shape. And all of them set off metal detectors for having at least somewhere near 4 ounces of metal. The 1988 Glock 17 had even more than that, but it set off the plastic gun panic of 1986 through 1988. Anti-Second Amendment lobbyists, that's what you'll hear, but anti-dangerous gun lobbyists failed to demonize, in the old days, cheap, lightweight, all steel and or all aluminum or zinc handguns because they were so small they were easily held in the hand, and most of the time weighed very low amounts, including so low that they sometimes would not set off a metal detector, and depending on the angle, wouldn't show up on an X-ray. They called them Saturday Night Specials because they were cheaply made out of aluminum or zinc at the time, when now the standard is aluminum and plastic for guns. Likewise, in 1988, Glock 17 came out that had 19 ounces of steel, and it was supposedly as bad because it was a plastic gun. Rehashing the Saturday Night Special meme by saying steel, and later on they had to stop using steel and had to later say metal. Because any metal can set off a metal detector, it's based on the conductivity of the metal. Pulverized iron will set off a a magnet detector, but may not set off a metal detector. There are metals that don't set off metal detectors, but these did. The idea was originally really to prohibit import of cheaply made guns made in some country where they pay 10 cents an hour and compete with the local U.S. government mandated and taxed military-industrial complex selling you guns at the local store. American-made. It was a protectionist racket. It had nothing to do with safety. And you can make a zinc gun, obviously, that's stronger than a Glock Plastikov easily. So, and that was the other thing. You could melt zinc down pretty easily. There's lots of things like this that are something I've learned a lot about. But anyway, this was all to try to prohibit imports of Glocks due to mainstream media parroting a plastic or carbon fiber or porcelain Glock 7 made in Germany without radio-opaque lead bullets, which would immediately set shit off or show up on the x-rays, from Die Hard. A myth from newspaper columnist Jack Anderson, lies made of whole cloth, and many other people. They justified it later by saying, well, it doesn't matter if it was true or not, good was done. Now we're going to talk about airport security, and I'm just going to whoop this out. This is a Swiss Army knife. This is the blade edge. It's less than 1/2 inch thick. This is a scalpel because I can sharpen it that way. This can do more damage than your stupid Rambo knife. This, with its magnetic clip on it, because it's so old I had to add a magnetic assist on it, is a very hard to see P38 can opener. Both of those were at one time regulated at the same level for the same reason I'm going to bring up in a minute. But fear-mongering about sharp-edged weapons started becoming a lot more important when an attack on the United States happened, because the people who did it are notorious, and wrongly asserted, to be the kind of people who would be able to cut 1,000 throats in one night by running around with a knife. That's a Klingon joke. It has nothing to do with the Arabs, but it kind of does. Lightweight metal detector resistant or evading knives are small and have a very high capacity magazine capability. They only need to be sharpened every few months, depending on how often they're used. People sharpen them excessively, and I used to work as a side job, I have had a lot of them, sharpening knives for restaurants. No, a knife doesn't need a magazine or reload. Yes, a knife with a really well-made handle, like I think they call it a cram bit or something, or just a fish hook looking knife, or, you know, a bird of prey shaped blade, can cut through a absolute fuck ton of victims compared to your now measly capacity 50 round magazine you're going to have to use an enclosed area on an airplane. Yes, they have less metal in, so they wouldn't set off the steel detector or metal detector. And the x-ray would show what looked like a chewing gum wrapper looking thing if you got the square ones, but some of them were shaped like the Stanley knife. They're just called Stanleys in some countries, especially where they're used by hooligans to kill. And there's a all plastic Stanley sold out of China that wouldn't set off any metal detector and still won't. The blades, if they're packed a certain way, don't look like blades. They might make a person open up your bag and look at them. Yes, it's not very hard to look this up. People have gotten through metal detectors and x-ray machines by making metal cutouts to put a blade in that make it a different shape so it looks like it's part of something else, like part of the hard side luggage. You know who did that? The TSA. They put some TSA people to work trying to find a way to make it to where you couldn't detect a knife. You know, they did it. They made a knife-shaped cutout to put the knife in, made out of the same metal, and just stuck it to the side of the briefcase or suitcase. Most people didn't see it. They didn't even try hard. And speaking of die hard, no, there isn't a ceramic Glock waiting for you to shoot people with. For fuck's sake. And it's not a Glock 7, although I want to make something called that. Anyway, most folks know what a cut feels like, not what a gunshot feels like. The fear of pain versus the fear of death are different. They respond to knives with more fear than they do guns. A gun to the head is assumed not to hurt since a head shot is a dead shot. Most people are practically aware of the fact if a gun's placed to their head, if you ask them afterwards, people who have been held hostage, they realize, well, if he aimed it at my head, I probably wouldn't recognize that I was shot. One of the ways to humanely put down an animal, if you're a hick or whatever, or a person who's ever worked in a slaughterhouse, is a bullet to the head. People are afraid of knives, not guns as much, on close quarters, which is one of the reasons I can and I will willingly disarm somebody with a gun, because all I have to do is point it away from me and everybody else, and it really isn't going to hurt anybody. Not as easily. It's a stupid thing to do. Don't do that. But one thing I will tell you is most martial artists, if they're not bullshitting you, will tell you if they see a knife, they have one major martial arts, mixed martial arts methodology to solve it. Run like hell, because knives suck. Knives can have two edges to them. They're not unidirectional. They're not ranged weapons. Running away works better. But a gun, it's a ranged weapon, but you have to actually hit somebody accurately with it. They respond to knives with more fear than they do guns. A gun to the head is assumed not to hurt since you'd be dead anyway. A knife to the throat will get others to follow your instructions, which is the goal of a hijacker, presumably. The risk and mass of carrying a knife are much lower than a gun. The shape of it can be disguised. Some knives don't even just show up at all. Not because they're made of anything special, but because they're on edge. They have the same outline as a Bic pen. If you put them in the right position, most things are scanned through an x-ray machine at the time the same way. If you just oriented it right and made it shaped like a Bic pen, they would assume it was a metal pen, because the outline for a knife matches a executive's pen shape. They can't see the edge if you don't flip it that direction. You just have to sneak a couple of knives through. But let's move on. A 4-ounce all-metal Stanley utility knife would maybe show up just as easily as the 4-ounce requirement for a plastic gun, so it'll set off a metal detector back in the 80s. That's actually what they did. They found out that would do it, and that was the minimum weight for most of the Saturday night specials in metal. They originally said steel because, again, this was a method to prevent imports of cheap guns. It had nothing to do with safety, but okay. But a clone of it made entirely out of plastic as a utility knife, like was found with a then living co-conspirator in the 9/11 attacks, is a little bit different when you see it in the evidence locker data you can look up. The knife that was probably used, if they were referring to, quote, box or cardboard cutters, was probably an all-plastic knife with a blade that would have shown up for jack shit on an x-ray or a metal detector. But no, it had to be box cutters because that's the meme. Let's find out where it came from. Anyway, it's slightly more relevant to look up physical evidence we can get. It's not typical. Different hijackers at different planes leaving from different airports must have used the same weaponry. Not really. They could have picked up something expedient. Box cutters made of plastic are just as common at the time as the metal ones. They were just cheap. Chinese made one. In fact, the one that's shown in evidence for a specific guy named Musuli or whatever shows he had a plastic one. Okay, if they all had the same knife, then they had that one. It wouldn't have showed up on metal detectors, and it would have been a lot more than a box cutter shaped like a chewing gum wrapper. By the way, a metallic-coated sugar, sugar-free, yes, chewing gum wrappers show up about the same size and shape as one of those really small box cutters people keep talking about. But anyway, in 2001, you stood a much higher likelihood of living through a hijacking, it was presumed. The doors weren't locked all the time on all airplanes. It was standard operating procedure not to resist a hijack. Why would you suspect it would be used as a kamikaze missile? You wouldn't. All of the witnesses are dead, and we only have data from plane phone calls. One of the planes had no communication about any weapons or tactics. One mentioned chemical sprays, mace. One said a passenger was stabbed or shot. One of them said a bomb was strapped on or there was a bomb threat and somebody was knifed. Barbara Olson did not describe how they took the cockpit, but reported knives and cardboard cutters. So out of all of this, we got a bomb, mace, knives, possibly a gun, but hijackers are always listed in the memes as using plastic knives, that was introduced by Ashcroft and a couple of people, or cardboard or box cutters. John Ashcroft, Donald Rumsfeld, mainstream media, and strawman truth or propagandists all tell me I have to believe it was only box cutters. This is such an over-the-top lie that I'm going to address it in this video. No, it wasn't just box cutters. We don't know what was really used, but it wasn't just that. Thanks for watching. Good day. Good luck with that.